Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode, a very special episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is the very special Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited because today we're doing a deep dive into the fascinating and often complex, I can actually say I know very little about this topic, process of entitling land in South Florida. And our guest today is Luciana L. Gonzalez, who brings over 15 years of high-level public service experience from her time with the city of Miami. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Fernando and Jennifer. I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation. It's my first podcast, like I mentioned to Fernando and Jennifer, so I'm very, very excited. And hopefully we can have a great talk.
I love it. We are honored, by the way.
We're so excited. So tell us a little bit. I know you were with the city of Miami, where you rose to become Assistant Director of Planning and Zoning. You were super involved with Miami 21. So give us some background about yourself, how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So after I finished my master's degree at FIU, I was exploring new opportunities and landed at the city of Miami, working for the Department of Economic Development at first. But quickly, things were getting very busy. This was 2003. And Miami 21 was just getting started. Miami 21 started in 2004. And, at first it was like, help us with some marketing. So I kind of started getting involved, and little by little, things picked up and public meetings started, meetings with neighborhood associations, land use attorneys, architects, engineers, and the general public. So we really started kicking off Miami 21, which many of you know took about 5 years. It took us from 2005 really until 2009 when it was adopted. And then implementing Miami 21 took a few years. And, time passed, and fast forward 15 years later, my involvement with Miami 21 was pretty much everything that I did was related to Miami 21. And aside from that, just handling the day-to-day, running the planning and zoning department. And the last 5 years that I was there, from 2013 through 2018, I was the assistant director for planning and zoning, overseeing many projects that we know today, like Miami Worldcenter, Midtown Miami, the Design District, Brickell Citycentre, all of these wonderful neighborhoods that we know that are today kind of started in the early 2000s. So I was, very happy and pleased and honored to be part of that growth and to, know the Miami that we know today and its beginnings.
That's great. And for those of you who aren't from Miami or who don't know, Miami 21 was a huge undertaking. It's basically our zoning code. So for the city of Miami, yeah.
Correct. And it continues on today. Many changes over the last couple of years as well to kind of, again, adapt to a growing city, demanding city that needs to accommodate affordable housing and development that's been happening here in the city again. So it's very exciting to be part of it all.
So for listeners who aren't familiar, including myself, can you break down what entitling land actually means?
Depending on the municipality that you're in, it can mean different things, right? But in general, if you're entitling land, you're basically getting a site plan approval to build on that land, whether it's because of the zoning that's in place at the different property or because of its use as well. Sometimes it's just not about the building itself, but the use that's being proposed for that location. So when you're entitling in one municipality may mean that you're just getting full building permitting approval. In other ones, it requires just kind of like this pre-approval prior to getting your, building permitting activity done. So the biggest thing that, for people that are building on land is do your due diligence, because every municipality is different. And, for those of you who may not know, the greater Miami area has 34 different municipalities, as well as unincorporated Miami-Dade, all of them with their own zoning regulations, their own processes, and every municipality is different. Some of the smaller municipalities are easier to work with. The larger municipalities have longer processes. So it's a lot of work, and it requires knowing how to navigate through these various processes to kind of get to a place where you can develop land.
This is always really interesting because, to your point, when people say we're entitling land, it could be a very complex multi-year process, especially when you're doing a change of use, when you're dealing with an environmental issue on the site. There could be so many components that are involved in it. It is often said that it is one of the most expensive and time-consuming parts of the project. What would you say are like the common hurdles that you find in our market on entitling land?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we have here in our city is the differing jurisdictions that you're dealing with. Because yes, you may be located in the city of Miami, but you're still going to have to deal with Miami-Dade County with DERM or WASA, DERM meaning the Environmental Resources Management, and WASA meaning the Water and Sewer Department. Then depending on where your property is located, you might have to be dealing with Florida Department of Transportation, but you're in the city of Miami. So I think that, the complexities of entitling the land vary based on the location and various jurisdictional agencies that are overseeing the various components. Sometimes it's easier. It really depends on the property. But I do think that that's the biggest challenge that we face, not only as brokers, consultants, but also as landowners, because you really need to understand all of these, the diversity of what we're dealing with here.
So what are the most common mistakes, given that complexity, that developers make when they're seeking entitlements? I think,
and I saw this when I worked at the city of Miami, I think lack of due diligence is one aspect that becomes a challenge. I had many people come to us at the city and say, I just bought this land and now they're telling me that I can't do what I want to do. I said, well, what kind of due diligence did you do prior to acquiring this piece of land? Oh, they told me I could do it. I said, well, that's great, but unfortunately, you can't do that, or you have to go through this process, or change of zoning, or change of use, or upgrading your life safety mechanism. So there's so many different things. So I think that lack of due diligence is definitely one. Another challenge that I would say is knowing how to navigate the process. And it's not an easy process. I know that municipalities try really hard to make it easier, and they're constantly making changes to try to accommodate that complexity. But it's kind of like, how do you eat an elephant? Like it's one step at a time, one bite at a time. It just requires a lot of experience to know, and then know who to go to when you need help as well. I think that sometimes when I've worked with clients, they are kind of like at their wits' end. And they're thinking they're only doing this to me. They're doing this on purpose. They don't like me. And I'm like, it's not quite how that works. I think that, like I said, municipalities are always willing to help, but sometimes you have to know how to get that help, and you have to know what you're doing in essence. It's just, especially in commercial real estate, it's challenging on the residential side as well. I've talked to several property owners who have been at the building permitting stage for almost 2 years, and they're just so frustrated and fatigued, and they just kind of don't see the end in sight. But then it just requires taking an in-depth look and see the pitfalls. And then once you look at that, you kind of see, I was like, oh, this is where, your contractor went wrong, and this is where you should have done this, or this is how you can accomplish this. So it's just, you see that at various levels. And a lot of times what I see too is kind of like the communication between the reviewing agency versus the team of people that are working on project, whether it's the engineers, the architects, the landscape architect, the arborist, so there's a team, and then there's the reviewing agencies, and there's like that in between, that gap. And sometimes they don't speak the same language. And it just, again, I go and I take a look and say, okay, this is what they're asking for. Have you answered it? And you take a look at the plans and they're like, no, you really didn't answer what they're looking for. And there's their delay, and there's a challenge that costs its time and money. And, the longer these comments remain unaddressed to the, municipality satisfaction, it will continue to kind of like, and then it kind of snowballs at the end. And that's when, people lose their patience or feel frustrated or blame the municipality for their problems. But I think it just requires a lot of like understanding, and to get to that understanding is very complex.
It's really interesting because you come to this conversation from a very unique perspective, having been inside of a major city, dealing with the approval and going through that process with the private sector coming to you. And now you as a consultant for private projects and having to deal with the multiple of municipalities, as you mentioned. What do you see? Because I'm sure you've thought about, well, if I ruled the world, these are the changes that I would make to a zoning department that would make it more efficient. Do you feel that is it a lack of people that are employed to guide the process? Is it a lack of modernization, and having more modern tools to go through the process? Is it just a cultural thing that happens in municipalities when it comes to growth and development? What's your perspective on that?
Well, speaking, City of Miami, which is the largest municipality within the greater Miami area, and having that experience from being in there for 15 years, I can tell you that the city has made great stride. People may not see that, but in the last, I would say 5-6 years, and kind of like around COVID time, the city launched the electronic plans review process. But prior to that, we were planning and putting the processes together for like 3-4 years before even launched, right? And no system is perfect, but I think that the city of Miami has come a long way from that kind of like the technology perspective to have plans reviews that are being done electronically, submitted electronically. I think the city of Miami has also improved the processes quite a bit. Come to think about 10 years ago, everything was paper-based. Still, I think from a resource perspective, I think that the building department has grown tremendously. I think that both planning and zoning departments have also grown tremendously. Even the environmental resources department has I think triple the amount of staff that currently from the time I was there. When I was there, we didn't even have an environmental resources department. It was just starting. We started from like nothing. And now it's just, I think it's a staff of over 10 people. I just looked the other day on their directory. So there have been resources put in place. There has been technology put in place. Do they need more people? I think so. I think they need more. And I think that finding qualified people sometimes can be a challenge. There's quick turnover. People are always moving around for new opportunities, whether it's internal growth, they're building their careers too, or going to a different municipality and applying their, having worked at the city of Miami can take you different places. So from that kind of like internal perspective, I think that the city continues to make changes. I think Miami-Dade County, very similar. Miami-Dade County does have a lot more resources they have put, and I think it shows through their systems. They're constantly looking for feedback on how to improve. So, when you get those emails, hey, help us improve, I think I always make that effort to kind of put in my 2 cents because they need that perspective from the private sector as well. And lastly, I'll just say one more thing. Like if I were to go back to the city, I would have a very different perspective having worked in the private sector now. And I feel like it can maybe even better. So I think that it's helpful to have the perspective.
Well, I think I want you back in the city of Miami, given my experience and with the city of Miami. I'm going to lobby for that because I don't see the optimism that you see in their whole planning and zoning department yet. Yeah, I don't see it.
I definitely have a very different perspective from a lot of people. I always have though, because when I was there, I saw the private sector, and now I'm in the private sector and I see the public sector. So I just I'm in a very unique situation, but always happy to help whenever you need.
Great. Thank you so much. So South Florida, you mentioned a little bit the environmental, but South Florida has unique, environmental infrastructure requirements. We have archaeological sites that we don't know or find out about when we're already, entitled and in the process. How do those different nuances affect the approval process?
Well, it can lengthen the approval process because it might require the applicant to go through additional boards or additional review. Going back to, that whole electronic system, now I think that there's kind of like a more holistic approach to seeing a project. I think that there are also resources available for the applicants or property owners to see what they're getting into, what are the applicable reviews that are necessary to be able to go through the process. So, it just kind of, again, goes back to I don't want to sound like a broken record, but due diligence is extremely important. So especially from like a zoning perspective and environmental, archaeological, historic, all of that plays a role. So it does lengthen the time, but I always, again, with like remaining positive, I've always said every problem has a solution. It may not sometimes be the solution that we prefer, but certainly you can kind of get somewhere by just kind of studying it and talking to staff and kind of coming up with a plan.
Just to go along, just to finish, because Fernando and I talk about due diligence all the time. It's one of we think it's the most neglected part of just about every transaction we've ever been involved in. So given that, if you've done your due diligence, how can a developer structure their timeline and their budget to account for possible delays, right? They go in thinking that it might take 90 days, 120 days. But we've seen it time and again where even though they're being extremely conservative, which how much time they think it's going to be, it's still not enough time. So I'd love for you to give, because I want to do a deeper dive into how working with you can help somebody who's going through entitlement speed up the process or help with the due diligence. But how could somebody plan and budget for that?
Well, I think that, and when I work with a client, I think choosing the right team is very important, whether it's, the architects, working with the landscape architects and the engineers if are necessary. But typically I'm working with an architect, and there are different types of architects for different types of projects. It's not like one size fits all. But I think that if the architect has the experience dealing with that particular municipality is very important. I think that I like to be conservative when it comes to the timeline because that impacts the budget. But I think that where I come in is kind of like that, those delays that go back and forth, like when you're talking about entitlements, you're talking about submitting a set of plans, a complete package to the reviewing agency and, submitting, getting past the pre-screening that's required. So they kind of they're not going to accept your application unless you have all your ducks in a row. And if you've missed one thing, they kick it right back to you. And how quickly you can return, what I always say is put the ball in their court again. That turnaround of putting the ball back on the reviewing agency's court is key. So if you get it kicked back, you have to take a look. You have to understand what they're looking for. You have to make sure that the architect is doing what is actually required. So it requires it's kind of like quality control. That's what it boils down to. Quality control of what they're asking for, what they've put together to respond to it, and then sending it back. And that back and forth, and there's several rounds of that goes on, like in the entitlement process, right? No matter where you go, that turnaround process is where you can shorten the length of time. And that's where you really know what you have to be doing, what they're asking for, whether the architect is responding to that. And then if we have to deal with, the preservation board or the urban development review board or, board of architects, whatever those requirements are, let's get to it. Let's respond quickly. Let's make sure that the quality of our responses is top notch and send it right back. Sometimes it takes a while, and it can be as simple as the architect didn't have the proper digital signature that's accepted by the municipality. And that can cause a 2-3 week delay. And that's not on the municipality side. That's on us. That's on the applicant side. So it could be as simple as that, or it could just be that we hit a major snag, that there might be like a water and sewer moratorium, or there's like a 200-year oak tree that's, proposed to be removed, and city saying, no, you can't remove that, So, I mean, there's so many different things that you see. It could be something with public works, which is kind of like, I always say that either public works or zoning are your Achilles heel. Everything else, I think that it's workable, even like floodplain, as long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing with elevations and things like that. But I think that, in my experience, public works and zoning, it's kind of like where things kind of are halted.
It bottlenecks.
It bottlenecks, okay. But a lot of times it's just because what was proposed is just not standard, or just it's going to cost a lot of money. So all of that needs to be looked at.
And staying with the due diligence, because I think it's such an important part of the process. And, Jennifer and I always speak, investors make their money at the time that they purchase, not at the time that they sell. So it's all on how you approach your due diligence and your study of the property. There is a difference between zoning and entitlement, which is that a lot of owners will go and look at the zoning code, or they'll go to Municode to see, well, what can I reasonably be able to build on this site? But sometimes they're missing out on the nuance that there might be some other issues, some other layer, some other department or organization that has a say into whether you're actually being able to build. How would you suggest that someone that is looking to buy land in order to build something, and they're looking at the zoning code and they're saying, well, the zoning code is telling me, if I'm reading this correctly, which is another part, right? To your point, you have multiple municipalities. Sometimes, depending on the municipality, when you look at the code, it's like, you're reading a foreign language. No, it's not very clear, right? There's no clarity.
And you have overlays on top.
Right.
And you have overlays. I'm like, what did I just read? Okay, I need to go back
exactly.
or I need to call somebody.
So during the due diligence process, how do they get a little bit more certainty of what they're able to, to decipher what they're able to build on the site?
I think you have to hire a professional, whether it's, a consultant or a land use attorney. Consultants tend to be a little bit more economical, and they kind of can put together something very similar. But I think that you have to hire a professional, and even if it's an architect, but even architects may not know all the little nuances of the different overlays and things like that, but just do thorough research on your property. You're going to have to get your environmental reports, whether, phase 1, maybe phase 2, and then, look at we have to look at moratoriums. We have to look at overlays. You have to look at the trees on site. You have to look at so many different things that, if it's an investor, may or may not know where to look for the information too. If it's on the water by the Miami River, you have to be really careful, and depending on the location. And of course, people like us who have been working in Miami for such a long time, we know where to look for things. And even if we don't, we know who to ask. We know who to call. We have our network that, that can assist. So having those resources is just kind of like a value add for any investor that's looking to buy a property. But don't close until you do all of that and you check all the boxes, So I know, and as like in the real estate side of things that I see more now that I'm in the private sector, everybody wants to get to the closing day, especially if you're, representing a seller, but it's our duty too, to be able to say, okay, not so fast. Let's make sure that you're not getting into something that you shouldn't be getting into. And for the most part, closings are happening every day, which is great for everyone. But it's just that, let's avoid you having to go talk to the city of Miami because you bought a property that now you can't do what you wanted to do with it.
Jennifer and I are very involved on the advocacy side of the real estate business. And, we've been to Tallahassee. We were in Tallahassee when the Live Local Act, for example, was enacted, right? And
thank you for that.
And be part of those conversations. You're very welcome. I find it interesting because you probably, of all people, have seen the effects, the practical implications when you have a state law like the Live Local Act. Can you speak to us a little bit about adding that layer of component when you have a state law that basically is overriding some of the local code and how the implementation of that actually looks, from a practical side, boots on the ground?
For me, that's a very, very tough question. But let's just kind of put it this way. I think that Live Local is going to generate a lot of workforce opportunities for a city that needs. Yesterday I was just watching something like a documentary on TV about the homelessness in LA and how close people are to being homeless because they're living paycheck to paycheck. So Miami can be very similar to LA, and it kind of touched on me when I watched that because I care a lot about the city, and sometimes we have to kind of be part of like the larger picture rather than just looking and see how it impacts us directly. When Live Local was first enacted a few years ago, I was like, oh, that's going to be really hard for municipalities, especially like knowing why we did Miami 21, to avoid that like out of context development that happened in the 90s and 2000s here in the city of Miami. It's like, oh, that's kind of tough. But I think since then, I've kind of learned how to embrace it just because of the opportunities that it's going to bring. As we know, it's already been tweaked to kind of address some of those concerns. I think it will continue to get tweaked. And I think that it will bring development and workforce housing, most importantly. Let's not call it development. Let's call it what it is, workforce housing. And creating that incentive, like that kind of public-private partnership that's needed, because government can't just meet the demand, and that's the simple truth. And it has to rely on the private sector to get it done. And sometimes because of that complexity of the entitlement process, you have to kind of do things that are not so popular from like a community perspective, but it is for the greater good of the community. So I think that, we're already seeing some groundbreakings on Live Local projects. I think they're great. When we analyze properties now, we look at Live Local as one of the various options that the developer may have. Sometimes that's the best answer for the developer, for that property owner. So then if it's available, then yeah, let's do it. And I think that even recently I got a call from like a building that's already been built, but they're taking advantage, not like just the zoning rules, but they're also taking advantage of the property taxes aspect of that bill, of the Live Local Act. So I think that that's also helpful, and that's going to kind of add the supply that we need here for workforce housing for our communities, to help everyone thrive. Everybody deserves an opportunity to live comfortably. And, and there's just so many people, and I'd love to see like the people that have the resources to kind of help people rise up because it's only going to make Miami better.
I love that focus on community. And in your unique position, you've worked with political leaders and community stakeholders. And how important is community outreach and being able to get through the entitlement process and getting a project approved? And then can you share an example of a project that in either context, either in the private sector or in the city, had significant pushback, but was eventually embraced by the community, or at least accepted by the community, if not fully embraced?
One of the first public meetings that I went to, it was so heated. And this is back in, I think, 2003, 2004. And if you're familiar with Miami and, Little Havana, the Southwest 13th Avenue corridor, which is a beautifully tree-lined street that connects Corway to Southwest 8th Street, right? And we had this public meeting at Corway Elementary, that's right off 13th Avenue. And people were up in arms because the city was going to come in and remove certain trees and just change the configuration of the way that 13th Avenue was, like the median was built. And if you drive by 13th Avenue today, it is a gorgeous amenity to that Shenandoah neighborhood, right? Shenandoah property values have grown significantly. And whether or not you could say that it's because, of 13th Avenue, I think it plays a role because it is gorgeous. And people were against the project. They were against the project because of the sidewalks and the trees. And, it got really heated with the then city manager, who didn't really take community input lightly, like didn't have thick skin to kind of hear the feedback. And I was just speechless at how bad it was. And this is just a municipal project, but fast forward to now, every time I drive by there, I'm like, oh my gosh, it must be so nice to live around here. You have kind of this linear park that you can walk to, shaded trees, just like foliage. So, and we know that adds value to a neighborhood. Very similar project on Segovia and Coral Gables, when the Coral Gables years ago kind of took everything down and planted all these new oak trees. Well, those oak trees right now are just gorgeous, and they're still kind of teenagers, So I can go on and on about different projects where there was a lot of community pushback. Miami 21, we had a lot of community pushback over the years. We had over 60 public meetings and public hearings, and then over 500 community meetings with various stakeholders throughout the city over the course of 5 years. But look what it's done. I think that when you look back, walkability of Miami has gotten so much better. The neighborhoods that exist today are just so much better. Miami was, because I feel, my personal opinion is because of Miami 21, Miami is the hot spot that everybody wants to come to. When COVID came and everybody was coming down here, it's because we were ready.
It's because it was such an intentional code,
it was
right?
Intentional,
it was so intentional in terms of the whole vision.
Correct. Exactly. It was a vision that started in the early 2000s, and by the time 2020 came around, we were ready to receive that. And I think that the last few years, it's kind of catapulted into something even better.
That's incredible. Well,
yeah, NIMBYism is always going to exist. I think sometimes community input is very important to make a project better. I should say that, to add to Jennifer, to your, question. I think that sometimes can it get excessive? Absolutely, because I think change is going to happen no matter what. So sometimes I think it's better to be part of that change, to embrace that change, and feel and participate in ways that you can mitigate your concerns, rather than just say, no, not here, kill it, I don't like it. Right. So I think it's better to just work together and mitigate, because I think the outcome of that process can create something much better.
Luciana, tell the audience, where did you go to high school in Miami?
I went to Miami Senior High, a beautiful historic building on Flagler Street that has been restored a few years ago and just continues to amaze me. That's where I met you, Fernando. That's where I met my husband. It's
Shout
a
out to
special,
Pep.
thank you. It's a special place in my heart.
How does it feel to have gone to a school that it's only a few blocks away from where you worked in the city of Miami and where you continue to do so much great work, and to be part of the projects that have really changed the landscape of the city, that have really changed, and allowed for it to grow responsibly? How does that make you feel to be a part of that process?
I'm so honored. It's to me, it's a special, it's a part of me. It's like who I've become. I came to the United States when I was 12 years old, grew up in the roads, went to, all the schools, Corway Elementary, which is in the middle of Shenandoah Middle School, Miami Senior High, then working for the city of Miami for 15 years. I feel like the experience that I never thought, when I first started working there, that, it would be such a big part of me. I always say that Miami 21 was my first baby, because I cared so much about it. And I still do, I care a lot about the city. I help wherever I can, whether it's, in my own neighborhood, working with my clients, or, just kind of giving feedback to some of my former colleagues at the city. It's I'm happy to pick up the phone and say, hey, look, I feel like, this is my input. And they listen and they welcome it. So I feel like I'm still part of that. I think it's important for everybody to kind of do their part in whatever small way they can contribute, because I know everybody's busy too, but I'm incredibly proud of the work that I did. No regrets, no looking back. I'm just so thankful for that opportunity, really, that, it's like I said, it's part of me. So, and I care a lot about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And you guys too. I mean, you guys do your part, the advocacy work that you do, working day in and day out with clients. I think that there's a role to be played by everyone.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about, as you moved from the public to the private sector, and your role and your work on the consulting side. So if you will tell people, what do you see as your role in your consulting business? When is the best time for them to reach out to you, which I would assume it's during due diligence.
In the very beginning.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that process and how you can help expedite. I'm assuming that you would probably want to be a part of also picking the rest of the team.
I don't pick the team, but I certainly do make recommendations. So yeah, it's early in the process is always best, because if I catch at the end, which sometimes has happened, then I said, okay, give me everything. Let me look at everything. Let me read, let me research, let me understand what went wrong and why we are where we are. But beginning is always best, and especially, yes, due diligence. Let's make sure you're picking the right property first and foremost. Let's make sure that we understand what challenges you're going to have ahead. Let's understand your timeline. Okay, so let's understand your vision. So then from there, it's okay, for this type of project, these are the architects that I would recommend. And I have a list. And then be the resource to be able to say, okay, you need to go and talk to so-and-so engineer, and you need to talk to this arborist, and you need to talk to, this person, because this is the issue that you're having. So having that kind of menu of options, I think, is what I provide, number one. Number two is, yes, that quality control. How do we shorten that timeline? Because your time, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, your time is money. It's valuable money to you. And I want you to get to the finish line as soon as possible. So, and then there's also the kind of the way that I work with clients is we break it down by milestone. So I'm not going to get paid until we reach that milestone. So there's an incentive for me to say, okay, yeah, we need to get to that milestone because I need to get paid too, right? It's really important, and it's really dependent on the type of project that it is, because we're not just talking about multifamily development. I've worked with schools, I've worked with nonprofits, I've worked with restaurants, I've worked with bars, I've worked with, various groups of people. So it's not like a one size fits all, and it's not one architect fits all. It's not one, and I take it as far as I can without being an attorney. If we reach a moment a stage that it says, okay, I think now you might need an attorney, and this type of attorney is probably the best suited for your project. Sometimes we don't need an attorney, and I love all my attorney friends, but at the end of the day, we want to do what's best for the client, and saving money is one of those goals. So that's kind of how I work, and I'm very flexible. And the structure sometimes is just strictly due diligence, so just one fee, but sometimes it's a entitlement project, and we're going to break it down, or you just need me for go to meetings with you, so let's work on an hourly basis. So It just really depends. But the beauty of just being kind of like a independent consultant is that I can work with the client and come up with a plan that best suits them.
Luciana, when you look 5-10 years down the line, especially with the advent of the application of AI in every sector of our society, really, how do you see AI influencing, maybe shortening some of those timelines, or influencing how we do entitlements in the future?
It's a good question. I think I use AI. I try to.
I only have one. There's only one good question per podcast. we got there.
No, the other one was a tough question. This is a good question.
Okay, there you go. I like it.
I think we're all using AI on a daily basis. I think it's just making us more productive. So rather if I needed to kind of put a letter together that's 2-3 pages worth of project information, AI is just going to help me write better, or help me put together something more concise. It's just going to shorten the time period that I put something together. So there's value to the client, right? I think that eventually, in 5-10 years from now, maybe AI can upload an application and or review a project, maybe like on that government side. Maybe the AI is the one reviewing it, and it's going to be faster to process some of these permits. So I thought about AI the other day, when the internet came around. At first I remember I was in college, I'm like, what's a hyperlink? And I had a really hard time understanding what a hyperlink was, the concept of it. And nowadays it's just like, oh yeah, you just click here, hyperlink. But so I think that's kind of like the next stage in humanity, really. It's a game changer, just like the internet was. And we'll adapt to it. New opportunities will come out of it. We'll be better professionals as a result of it. And who knows, maybe we will get replaced at some point in time. I think humanity evolves. We'll be around for a while. We'll just be different than what we know what it is today. Just like before the internet, we were different people.
Well, Jennifer just got a Tesla. And she's concerned that AI, she doesn't want to talk bad about AI, but she's very worried.
Okay.
Because she's concerned that AI is going to drive her to an undisclosed location.
Okay. Maybe, you still have the controls of the system. So, I don't let my Tesla drive for me. That's just me. But eventually I might get used to it.
Oh, listen. Jennifer is all in on the self-driving mode.
It was weird. It's hard.
It's gotten better.
I drive like this.
Again.
A friend of ours said, no, when you do it, you need to be like you're in the front car of a roller coaster and just take your hands off the wheel.
Yeah, exactly. Take it off. Yeah. So we're definitely in for some interesting times in society in general when it comes to technology, but it's kind of just like the next leap. And you got to embrace it, just kind of tying that to the NIMBYism and community input. Don't resist change. because change is coming. So just embrace it and be part of it, because you're going to be better as a result.
I think for most people, at least speaking for myself 100%, the biggest thing, I love change. It doesn't bother me. I think the rate of change right now, the speed with which change is happening, not just in one phase, right? It's not just the internet. It's across the board because of AI, because of tech, because it's just the pace, right?
Agreed.
That for me has been the hardest thing to adapt to.
Right.
And how do you focus? And focus has become an issue, because with so many new things coming and so many things to learn and where to apply it and everything else, I think that those are at least for me personally, those are the two big challenges in learning how to do that, given how rapidly everything is changing.
Oh, I agree. And that's, and the people that are open to change are having a hard time. Can you imagine people who are not open to change? Or,
Absolutely.
I don't want to age ourselves, but we're not super young that we can adapt to all this technology. So it takes us a little bit longer to kind of learn some of these things, so there's just so many different ways of thinking and approaching this, and I think age does play a role, because some people in our age group, I don't know what we're called, whatever generation, they might not be as adaptable to change as some of us are. So I think that with that velocity of change, it's going to be really interesting how certain people are going to end up and in the times that we're in. But I think adapting to change is very, very important, especially nowadays.
Thank you so much. I feel like we had such an enlightening conversation. I was sitting here taking notes because there's so many things that you said that just really resonated with me. I'm sure they're going to resonate with our listeners as well. So
I'm so happy to hear that.
Kudos. First podcast in the can for you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting. Again, talk about change. I never thought I'd be in a podcast, but here I am.
Well, we appreciate all your insights, and we're going to put all of Luciana's contact information so that you can get her help and consulting very early in the game.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Before you start doing your due diligence. Not, you don't call her when you already find the problem. It's a lot easier to solve if you bring her in from the start. Absolutely. We will have all that in our show notes.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for joining us. Fernando, say goodbye.
Guys, thank you for joining us. Absolutely. Thank you, Luciana. And thank you, as always, for pulling up a chair and joining us in our podcast. We appreciate all of the feedback that you provide and your continuing patronage and listening to us. Remember that we have our YouTube channel, Between Two Chairs, and all of our interviews are uploaded there in video, so that you could listen to this podcast in any format that you prefer. Thank you again, and I'll say goodbye. Jennifer, say bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for having me.